guys. Thank you so much for your feedback on the first episode. We got a lot of great emails, great messages on Facebook, TikTok. So we're really glad that you guys enjoyed it, and we're very excited to be launching our second episode tonight.
Yep, finally recording another one.
So before we get into the episode, I do want to let everyone know that we've decided to add trigger warnings before discussing anything that could be upsetting or cause triggery moments for anyone. We will announce it right before mentioning the potential trigger and suggest skipping a few seconds or a few minutes ahead at that time. Now, to get into the episode we are covering tonight, we are going to be discussing the disappearance of Helen Brach, also known as the Candy Lady.
Is she related to Eddie Brock?
I don't know who Eddie Brach is.
Oh, okay. Comic book reference, sorry.
So when she disappeared, she was the heiress to the Brach Candy Company, and she is still considered, she's still considered the wealthiest woman in America to have disappeared without a trace. Now, I had, when I first started this, a plethora of information about the Brach Candy Company, and I ended up deleting it because there's so much information, so many components and parts to this case. I didn't want to add unnecessary information. I'm going to give you a very broad description of what the Brach Candy Company is. Now, it is said that Brach's candy corn is the #1 selling candy corn product in the U.S.
Yep, I can agree with that. Yep.
I love candy corn. I know it's not a top favorite. I love candy corn. Do you know the heart-shaped candies? The ones that come in the box and they say like, I love you or I miss you. They're hard sugar candies.
They're like the sweet tart type ones?
Yeah, like you get them around Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Brach Candies basically invented those. So that's also Brach's. You might know the logo. The logo is white lettering with like a purple or magenta banner and border around the lettering at the top.
Me and my infinite wisdom pronounced it Brach.
Yes, it's spelled B-R-A-C-H, so that might help you guys understand what the Brach Candy Company is. There's not a lot known about Helen Brach's life. She was born in 1911, okay? So there's not...
Whoa.
Yeah, there's not a lot of information on her. We do know that she was born Helen Marie Voorhees on November 10th, 1911.
Voorhees?
Yes.
As in Jason Voorhees?
Correct, no relation.
Okay.
So she was born Helen Marie Voorhees on November 10th, 1911 in Unionport, Ohio. Her parents were Walter and Daisy Voorhees.
Ohio.
She was not born into money. Very blue collar, basically low to middle class. She was not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. She did have a younger brother named Charles who was born in 1917. She did marry her high school sweetheart. Definitely didn't last. I don't think they had any children. I believe they didn't have any children, and they were divorced by the time she was 21. Over the next about 17 years, she just had odd jobs, basically no information about her life. In 1950, she moved to Miami. So she left Ohio, went to Miami. She worked in a Palm Beach country club. Now, you have to remember, back in the 50s, there was no such thing as Miami-Dade County. All of that, basically, from Palm Beach down was Palm Beach County still. So she lived in Miami, but technically still lived in Palm Beach County. And she worked at a Palm Beach County country club, and she was like a hat/coat check girl. So,
big money.
Yeah, so basically, I don't know who's wearing a coat in Miami, Florida, but at some point, people were wearing coats and having their hats checked. While she was working at the country club, she met Frank Brach, who was the heir to the Brach Candy Company at the time, and it was the largest candy company in the U.S. At this time, though, he was still married, but he was separated from his second wife and was vacationing in Florida at the time. He was living in Illinois, but vacationing in Florida. Frank and Helen fell in love, and they were married the next year in 1951. Helen was 39, and Frank was 60. Now,
Whoa.
I know what you're thinking, or a lot of other people are thinking, possible gold digger, what could you have in common? But they were said to have a very happy marriage. Like, they were genuinely in love. She genuinely loved him. She loved her husband. She genuinely did. The thing about Helen is she was not born as a socialite, and she was not married to be a socialite. She was said to not basically catch on. She didn't catch on. She didn't get it. In my eyes, when I was reading everything, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but she just didn't sound like a Karen. She was described as shy, quiet, She just didn't fit into the socialite scene.
She's a homebody.
Yeah, she and her husband seemed to be homebodies, and she just didn't seem to be, I can't really explain, like, she just seemed to be a normal person. She was just a normal person with money. But again, she's a millionaire at this point. Her brother described her as a very loving person, very easy to get along with, very easy to make friends with, and if she liked you, she'd do anything she could for you. After they got married, they owned houses in a couple places, but Florida, there was a Fisher Island, Florida. I've never even heard of that place, but they owned a house there, and they owned a house in Glenview, Illinois. Glenview, Illinois is where most of our story is going to take place. Now, Glenview, Illinois was known as horse country. It's about 30 to 45 minutes outside of Chicago. The elite live here. The big wigs, the top of the top, bankers, investors. Again, this is like the 1950s, okay? Big people live here. They lived in an 18-room mansion, the Brachs did. This place had a 5-acre minimum. If you wanted to live here, you had to buy at least 5 acres.
Yeah, for the horse.
Correct. Well, and that's the thing, is these people lived and breathed horses.
Yeah.
Raced them. They competed with them. It was their everything. Horses meant everything, and horses are going to be a very big part of this story. Frank owned racing horses, and he and Helen frequented horse racing tracks in Florida and in Illinois. So they would go, again, high society, sitting with the rich and famous, betting on these horses, watching their horses win, so on and so forth. In 1959, Frank hires Jack Matlick to be a houseman. Now, I know you're like, houseman, what is a houseman? He was basically a handyman, but Helen referred to him as a houseman. I will always refer to him as a houseman. That's just how I'll refer to him. Remember his name. He comes up later.
I was going to say Matlick there. He already sounds like the killer.
Matlick. So, in 1966, Frank sells the Brach Candy Company and basically doubles his fortune.
Sells it. Oh.
Sells it. He sells it to, oh gosh, I forgot the name. Like American something product.
Yeah, like a large, like, production
Correct.
corporation.
Correct.
Yeah.
He sells his share, and he basically doubles his fortune.
Yeah.
In 1970, at age 80, Frank passes away.
Okay.
By all reports, again, Helen was very happy in her marriage. She loved her husband, and she was heartbroken, devastated. But with his death, he did leave her about $20 million, which today equates to about $160 million.
Yeah. Like Daniel Tosh says, it's hard to frown on a jet ski.
She spent her time hanging out and socializing with her friends. She talked on the phone a lot. Now, when I say she socialized with her friends, it sounds like they came to her house. I think she...
Yeah. House parties, yeah.
Correct. Not necessarily house parties.
Not house parties, but like little get-togethers.
Yeah.
Like, you know, bridge. Like when you come over and your friends and you play bridge or, you know...
I figure like tea and crumpets kind of thing. Like, I just again, was not big into, you know, social parties and things like that. So I think she just like invited her friends over, but she was said to talk on the phone a lot. She was very sociable on the phone. One of my favorite things about her is she used to drive pink and purple Cadillacs and Rolls Royces because they were the Brach Candy Company's colors. How adorable is that?
She was proud of it.
She was super adorable. She was a huge animal lover, and she actually started an animal rights foundation that still operates today. But she was also described as sad, lonely, and a recluse after her... Recluse or recluse?
Yeah, it's either or. Vase and vase.
Oh, thank you. Tomato.
Yeah.
She was a recluse. Her animals became a huge part of her life, and she is said to have owned a dozen dogs, like, at once.
Oh,
I mean, 18-room mansion, you live there by yourself. Why not?
Instead of the cat lady, she's the dog lady.
Yeah. Yeah, she loved her animals. Now, she did keep Matlick around, and she relied on him heavily to do, like, just home stuff for her, basically. You have to understand, again, this is from the 50s, 60s, and 70s where women relied on men. You know what I mean? You lose your husband, he probably did everything. He probably balanced the checkbooks. He paid all the bills. He did everything, and now he's gone, and now she has to do it. So unfortunately, back then, women leaned on other men to basically take the position of their husband, not in a relationship sense, but you hire someone to basically do those things for you. I'm going to introduce another key player in this story. In the fall of 1973, Helen meets a man named Richard Bailey when she's introduced to him through a mutual friend. He's known as a wealthy horse dealer. I'm going to give you two of his nicknames because the nicknames in this episode are absolutely ridiculous. And I don't mean to laugh because I understand it's a case. Someone went missing, but the nicknames are absolutely ridiculous. He has the nickname of the Golden Tongue and the Galloping Gigolo.
Oh, okay.
Oh, they're fantastic.
I bet you he came up with them for himself, too.
It's like BTK naming himself all over again.
Yeah.
Now, Richard Bailey, he is such a bag of poop, okay? He's a scam artist. He's a con man, predator, swindler. He is almost one of, if not the worst con men I've ever heard of. He's a horrible human being. But the women that he scammed before they realized they were being scammed, he was like a Casanova. He was very charming. He was very sweet. He was attentive. He knew how to play the game.
That's how they are, yeah.
Yep. He wooed them with fancy cars, as in like he would come and pick them up in fancy cars. He would bring them candies, chocolates. He made them feel special and he made them feel wanted.
Was it Brach's candy?
It's funny you said that because when I was reading this, I was like, I wonder if he ever brought them Brach's candy. But anyway, he scammed dozens and dozens of women. And he scammed them in various ways. He started scamming them when he opened a dance studio. They never explained like what he was doing by scamming them, but he started his scamming then. Then he opened a driving school. Basically, he would have these women paid to learn how to drive. He would teach them the absolute bare minimum, but then keep charging them money. And even if they wouldn't pass the test, they would come back and be like, well, I didn't pass. And he'd be like, oh, I have to charge you another $500 to teach you. And he basically, until they ran out of money or just refused to pay him again, he just kept collecting money from them. He did target women that were middle-aged and widowed. It was said that maybe they were not attractive or they were overweight. One lady he swindled had a horrific alcohol problem. Basically, he found women that were at their lowest low mentally and emotionally, but financially they couldn't get any higher. You know what I mean? Like he swindled sad, lonely women. Again, I mentioned he had the name Golden Tongue, and that's because he could basically talk a woman into anything.
Yeah.
He was smooth. He was very suave. In his lifetime, he scammed dozens of women out of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I'm surprised it was just hundreds of thousands.
And again, this is hundreds of thousands of dollars in the 70s. We're talking in the millions.
Yeah.
So, he was known to quote, wine and dine rich widows, then convince them to pay top dollar for broken horses. We're going to get into, broken down horses. We'll get into what his scam was and all of that here in a bit. Helen was his perfect victim. As I said, she was described as lonely, not super sociable, naive. She needed and wanted someone's attention, vulnerable, and above all else, she was wealthy. He actually referred to her as his golden goose. He's so fantastic. Someone once asked him, how can you sleep with these people? Like how, because you have to understand, Richard Bailey was like 20 years younger than Mrs. Brach. So someone asked, like, how can you sleep with these people? Not even just for their looks, but like, how can you do this knowing that you're swindling these people out of money? And he said, I just shut my eyes and think about money. Now, onto the horse scam that he was pulling. Again, he wooed these women. He got them to trust them. And when they finally did trust him, he would sell them a horse because that was his gig. That he was a horse seller. That's what he did.
Yeah.
So he would make it. When he was discussing this in a interview, he made it sound like it was a business transaction, right? Oh, I just took these ladies out to dinner and smoozed up to them or took them out to lunch or whatever the case may be, and talk them into a horse. he had relationships with these women. These women were like, he was my boyfriend. So he made it try to sound like, oh, I'm like a car salesman, just sell something, be sweet, flirt a little. But he wasn't. He had relationships with these women for months and some of them for years. He was actually scammed by a group of people in Chicago. We'll discuss that group in a second. And that's how he actually got the idea for his new shtick of how he was going to do the horse scams. Let me explain to you what the horse scams are. He would buy horses that weren't worth very much for various reasons, like they were lame, not making their current owner money, or basically they just should have been retired at that point. Then he would have the women buy these same horses for thousands of dollars, up to $100,000. He even sold the same horse twice under a different name, and I actually think he did that to Mrs. Brach. She bought the same horse twice. He also put out personal ads to help women find, just to scam them, like to help find women to scam. He couldn't seem to find his way in with Helen with the horses, though, so he tried with her for months to basically figure out how he could, like, swindle her. Like, because again, he only spoke to these women just because they were rich and he was trying to find a way to get in. He finally found his way when they took a trip to Florida, and she mentioned that she wanted to buy some racehorses. Within a year, Helen bought 3 horses from Bailey for $95,000. Again, This is the 70s. Guess how much he paid for those horses?
How much?
$18,000. So he made, that's a huge profit.
I would say so.
Huge profit. She suspected nothing, or she just seemed to ignore the red flags. On one thing that I watched, again, she's hand over fist money. We lived in an era in the 70s where women were still taught to respect men, that men are, they're going to lead you in the way, or maybe she just loved Bailey and she didn't want to lose him. So she let him, she thought maybe he was trying to get, his feet wet, trying to get into the horse industry. And you know what I'm trying to say? Like, she didn't want to like dash his dreams or make him go away if she didn't pay up. After 3 years, Helen became suspicious that something was going on when Bailey and some of his business associates wanted Helen to spend a ton of money on training the horses she could actually tell weren't worth much because they weren't doing well in races and stuff. Mm-hmm. So again, to recap, Richard Bailey is selling people horses that he's buying for 10 cents on a dollar, and turning around and selling them for millions. And these horses, again, to horse lovers, they're worth money because they're a life. But to these people, high and mighty, high society, they're racing horses for money. You know what I mean? They want horses that are going to make them money.
They rarely spend money unless it's some kind of investment.
Correct. This is an investment for them. That's a good way of saying it. He wanted her to spend $50,000 on training these horses. She just spent $95,000 on 3 horses. Now she has to spend $50,000 training them? That's insane. That's absolutely crazy. Before giving away any more money, she hired an expert to examine these horses and to give his professional opinion on basically what to do, like give his professional advice. It was not good. He's like, these horses are completely and utterly useless. And that is when she figured out she was being scammed. Because, I mean, 1 horse, maybe. You're talking 3, 4, 5. She could have bought 10 horses for all I know. And none of them were really worth anything. She did open up to some of her friends about the fraud and supposedly confronted Bailey about the fraud. Now, you have to understand, she's a boss lady. And again, in this one documentary I watched, they explained it as she walks into a police station. She's not filing the report with the policeman. She's getting the chief of police. She walks into the courthouse. She's not going to get, the assistant attorney. She's getting the state's attorney. Yeah. I mean, she's getting the head, you know what I mean? She is the most wealthy person in the U.S. She could have blown Bailey off the map with these scams that were going on. But she had a couple things coming up in her life. She was going to Minnesota to go for a checkup at the Mayo Clinic, and she was going to a trip to Florida afterwards. So she just basically pushed it out of her mind for whatever reason and did not report Bailey the day she disappeared. February 7th, 1977, Helen takes a trip to Rochester, Minnesota for a routine checkup at the Mayo Clinic. All in all, she gets a clean bill of health. Why she chose there, I don't know. Maybe, again, this is in the 70s. We never seeked medical attention in the 70s, obviously. So she took a plane, went to Minnesota, ended up staying at the hospital for like 5 days or a week. So I don't know if they had a hotel there or what. But basically, she was going for like a normal checkup. Just like a basic checkup, make sure everything's good. Guess they were running tests and stuff. I have no idea.
How old is she at this time?
65.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and age, but I've never heard of anyone going and staying in the hospital for 5 days while they're getting a normal checkup. So anyway, again, I'm not sure when she checked in. It was said that she stayed in Minnesota for 10 days, but she was only there for like 5 or 7. So at some point, maybe she stayed in a hotel. Now, 10 days later on Thursday, February 17th, Helen checks out of the Mayo Clinic and goes to a small shop and she buys some toiletries and some cosmetics. She walks out of the shop. Until this day, no one has ever seen Helen Brach again.
Oh, wait. She goes in.
Mm-hmm.
She buys, like you said, toiletries, cosmetic stuff.
Correct.
Walks out of the store.
Says toodaloo to the cashier.
And then it's just gone.
Gone. Poof. Blip. Gone. No one has ever, till this day, today, February 20th, 2023, she has never been found. Her body has not been found. She was never seen again.
Wow, she never made it to the grand opening of the first Star Wars movie.
No. Well, that was 1977 though, right? Yeah. But I don't know when in 77.
I think it was April.
But Matlick. I told you to remember Matlick.
Oh, good old Matlick.
Yep. Matlick said that he actually picked up Helen Brach at the O'Hare Airport in Chicago on February 17th, 1977. He said that Helen spent the weekend at home, and then he dropped her off at the airport that Sunday, February 20th, to catch a flight for a planned trip to Florida. I know what you're thinking. My love, my dear, you just said no one has ever seen her alive. I think if he saw her, he killed her.
I'm kind of getting a vibe like maybe Bailey got to Matlick and they came up with some kind of deal.
It's a fantastic thought. I will be covering that thought in a few minutes.
Oh,
but that's
okay.
A very good thought. Outside of Matlick supposedly seeing her, nobody's ever seen her again. 2 weeks after she went missing, or Matlick said he dropped her off at the airport, he calls law enforcement trying to report Helen missing, but was told that only a family member can report her missing. The reporting, I know, it was a state law, again, in the 70s. Obviously now that's not.
Did she have any family left?
She had her brother. So let me explain this part to you, because I'm telling you, I watched 2 documentaries. I read a dozen articles. The being reported missing made absolutely 0 sense to me. So they say that he dropped her off on Sunday to go to Florida. Then he ends up reporting her missing sometime before March 5th. And I'll explain the middle part in a second. But this is basically the scenario. He drops her off there on Sunday, February 20th. He then tries to call and report her missing because I guess he hasn't heard from her. Police say he can't. He diligently, it's proven, he diligently tried to track down her brother Charles in Ohio. And he does. He tracks him down. Charles is dead. So, spoiler, he's born in 1917. Charles rubs me a little bit the wrong way. Okay? Because this is his response.
Charles would be 60.
No. I'm saying he's dead now. Today he's dead.
Oh, yeah.
So, at this point, he's alive.
Oh, okay.
Today he's dead. So, I'm going to say what I want to say about him because no one can sue us for defamation because he's dead. So, I didn't like Charles. I'm not convinced Charles didn't have something to do with his sister's death. Okay? But.
Really?
Yes. His reaction was strange. He doesn't rush out to Illinois, hearing that his sister is missing. Okay? He says he can't come out till the end of the week. So let's say, now no one specifies when he gets a hold of him. So I don't know if he got a hold of him Monday, Tuesday, Sunday, Thursday. I don't know. But it is said he does not rush out there. And he says that he can't come until the end of the week. So he finally gets there, right? And I'm not sure if it's Matlock who found the diary in the papers or if her brother found the diary and papers, but a diary and papers were found. And supposedly there was a note with them that said, if anything happens to me, destroy these. Like burn these, destroy these. So they do. Before reporting her missing, both of them, Charles and Matlock, they say they never read it. No one would want her private feelings and thoughts. We just burn them.
That sounds convenient.
Yeah. My sister goes missing. I'm not burning anything. Nothing.
Right.
And I haven't even reported her yet and you're already burning them? So, weird. Finally, 16 days after she walked out of that shop, her brother reports her missing.
16. Huh?
16 days. They, of course, interview Matlock first because Matlock's the last person that said he saw her alive. I'm going to reiterate. He said he picked her up at O'Hare Airport on February 17th, 1977. Helen spent the weekend at home. Then he dropped her off at the airport. Dropped her off at the airport that Sunday to catch a flight for a planned trip to Florida. Now, some discrepancies, some guess could not be discrepancies, but could be discrepancies. Number one, according to grunge.com, no one recalled seeing someone fitting Helen's description on the flight home from Minnesota. Not one person. So they're kind of indicating there that maybe she never even got on the plane. Number two, no one saw or spoke to Helen from Thursday to Sunday. So he picked her up on a Thursday from O'Hare and then Sunday dropped her back off at O'Hare. There were a group of painters at the house that saw no trace of her being home, never saw her. Mind you, they're working on her house. And she's supposed to be home all weekend, never saw her. She wasn't returning any of her friends' phone calls, and Matlock was answering the phone saying, oh no, she's sick, or no, she's not here, or telling different stories to different people. Now, I don't know if he ever answered the phone before, but it sounded like she always returned calls and she was always close to her phone. Mm-hmm. Friends showed up and he turned them away, saying that she was unwell. The gardener said he saw Matlock with two suspicious-looking strangers, and he had some work done to the house. Basically, he had 2 rooms painted and some carpet replaced in one room, and he cleaned the maid's room. I don't know if he normally cleaned the maid's room. I don't know if the painters were hired before, but he had all of these things done the weekend Helen went missing. He also had one of Helen's vehicles detailed at the time and a toll receipt showing he drove to a remote farm that Helen owned. He was the housemate. Him going out to the farm or having her car detailed, I don't know if those are specific details. Police think it is, but we have no idea. You know what I mean? Having the car detailed, that's something I would have my handyman do. Hey, find someone to detail my car. I mean, she's a millionaire. She's not detailing her own car.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I mean, some of it's fishy. I mean, saying that she's not answering the phone, she's not calling her friends back, that's fishy.
I mean, the car, okay, I'll give you that one, but having rooms painted and carpet replaced, like, that's not something that you just do on a whim.
Well, correct. That's the thing, though. I couldn't find anything that said when, were these people hired right on the spot? Did he call them that day and say, hey, can you come and do this? That I don't know. And I tried to find it. Tried to see when these people were scheduled to come out. Now, he said he took her to the airport. Drop her off, remember? She's going to Florida. Mm-hmm. When they checked the airport information, she had no flight booked under her name. She had no luggage with her. And he supposedly dropped her off hours before the first flight left for Florida. And when I mean hours, they weren't leaving until Monday morning. He dropped her off on Sunday. She's 65. What is she, sleeping in the terminal?
I mean, she slept at the hospital.
I mean, but that's different. I was at least a scheduled sleep. So, I mean, so again, she did have a planned trip to Florida, but I don't think at that time you could book flights in advance. Again, we're talking about the 70s.
Yeah.
I don't know how you book flights. I think you just show up. And
It
then
sounded like they used that planned trip to Florida as their scapegoat.
Correct. While he was being interviewed, he did admit to forging Helen's signature on checks totaling $13,000, which is $62,000 today. He also stole $75,000 in cash, which equals to about $400,000 today. He did this after she went missing. She ain't coming back. You're not going to steal that much money for... Now, mind you, he's been with her for 20 years. And just so the weekend she happens to go missing is when you decide to steal $465,000 in money today from her? No, that doesn't jive.
Mm-hmm.
Sad part. She actually left him $50,000 in her will.
Oh, my God.
I know. I don't know if he knew about that, but...
Oh, probably not.
But I bring it up because he ends up... He admits to these charges. And then when the money finally gets released, he ends up saying, oh, no thanks. They basically make a deal that says, you can't take this $50,000 and we won't press charges against you, against her estate, for stealing $465,000. So he doesn't get it. I do want to point out that he did fail 2 lie detector tests. Now, I don't go much by that, but it is a piece of the information. And supposedly, he ordered a meat grinder attachment during this time.
Attachment for what?
No clue. That's literally all it said, was that he ordered a meat grinder attachment. I don't know for what. I don't know what it has to do with the story, but it was notated everywhere. Probably... They always want to give, oh, someone's missing. What could he have done? The meat grinder attachment could be like 5 inches. I have no idea. There's like zero description of it from what I could find. I know you're wanting me to tell you that they had good information, and he got charged and convicted. No. Nothing. Nope. We get nothing from him. He actually dies of natural causes in 2011. No charges are ever brought against this man. Nothing.
Got to spend that money and everything.
Yep. I mean, nothing from him. So, Matlick is now dead in this story. He's gone.
Well, we still got someone left.
We still got Bailey.
Mm-hmm.
They decided... Let's go back to 1977. So, the interview, Matty Boy Matlick, get nothing from him. They decide, they need to branch out, interview more people. So, they decide to reach out to Bailey. The Golden Tongue lied his katookus off. Okay? He's like, who? Helen who? Bach? I don't know her. No idea who she is. Couldn't tell you who she was. Lies. Later on, in an interview, buku years later, he's like, oh yeah, no, I knew her. I was waiting in Florida for her. Because that was his alibi. Oh, I was in Florida. And then years later, he's like, well, I was waiting for her in Florida. Yet he just told the cops he barely knows her. Okay? So he's good at detaching himself from things. So like I said, later on, he says, oh, I was waiting for her in Florida. I was calling her and she wasn't answering the phone. Here you go. Typical answer here. I thought she was off with another man. Really? She's 65-year-old recluse. Who is she going out with? Seriously? Whatever. He's scum. Now, so that was 1977. Nothing happens for 2 years. Again, she's missing. The problem is no weapon, no body, no crime. No one can prove anything happened to this woman. Right. Okay? So during this 2 years, Bailey is still doing his scamming. He is buying horses and selling them to women and making hand over fist money. Now keep in mind, he was not doing this alone. This was a massive production, and I'll get into a little bit more of that later. 2 years later, in red spray paint, near Helen's old estate, is this saying: Richard Bailey knows where Mrs. Brach's body is. Stop him, please. It was said that it was probably a hoax. People in the horse industry or out in horse country didn't like him.
Right, he's a crook.
Because he's a crook, and there was other ties to things that he was doing. I didn't really want to get too much into everything that was happening, but this is in the like equestrian world, this horse scamming that was going on is one of the biggest cases in horse history. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of information on it. It's pretty crazy. But it was said that the horse people did it, but they decided that they wanted to question him again. Okay, so they question him again. They get nothing. 7 years now. It's May 1984, and Helen is declared dead as of February 17th, 1977. Again, no body's been found. No one's been charged in connection of her disappearance. They finally release her estate money, like, her the house and all that. Roughly $30 million goes to various charities that helps animals. That is roughly $86 million today.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously love this woman. Her money is still funding remember I told you she started an animal rescue? That $86 million is still funding that rescue today. The brother got $500,000, which is like roughly $1.5 million. And then obviously Bailey didn't get his. He skipped out on it. Now, 12 years later, this is where things start getting juicy. 12 years later, in 1989, a man named Steve Miller, who was a U.S. attorney, wanted to go after Bailey on RICO charges for the horse trade, trade scheming. He heard that Bailey had once been connected to Brach, and he wanted to see if he could tie the two cases together through RICO. Now, I don't want to get too much into RICO. That's a whole nother podcast. But it is the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations. That's what it stands for. And if Miller could prove a pattern of frauds that were similar, he could use RICO and introduce the Brach case as part of the fraud schemes since the fraud was ongoing.
Okay.
So don't want to get too much into that. Now, I apologize. I know this case has been a little sporadic, but I have to digress for a moment. I'm going to introduce two more key players into this story. Now, I do want to give a little bit of a trigger warning. I'm going to mention something about animal cruelty. You don't have to skip forward. All I'm going to mention is that there were horses that were killed. That's all I'm going to say. Not going into detail about anything, but just know that's what I'm going to discuss here a little bit. But again, I'm not going to mention how anything happened. Bailey wasn't the only one conning horse country. There was a con as well of killing horses. If a horse was lame, not making money, not performing well, whatever the case may be, horse owners would hire someone. Now, this person they hired is Tommy Burns, also known as the Sandman. And he would kill the horse. He would make it look like a mysterious death, whatever he needed to do so that the owner could collect the insurance money. This was a massive, massive scheme.
Well, I mean, you got to understand, back in the day, though, I mean, like, and I know this obviously isn't back in the day, per se, but, like, back in the day on farms and stuff, back in the 1800s and stuff like that, you have a horse that can't work. I mean, they basically took it out and shot it.
Correct. But the difference is they did it more for, I guess I see it a little different because that was an extra mouth to feed that maybe they couldn't feed. Here, it's an investment. Oh, you're not making me money? Goodbye. They instead of just selling the horse.
Well, right, because if you keep it around and it can't make you money, and now it's just a money pit.
Now it's costing you money, yeah. Right. And instead of selling the horse, there was one instance that this guy, I'm going to talk about him later, so I'm not going to mention too much about him, but this guy basically had a horse. He wasn't winning on the horse, but he didn't want to sell the horse in fear that, let's say the horse was doing better with another jockey. He didn't want to be seen as, oh, well, I'm the problem, not the horse. So he had the horse killed and collected $250,000 on the insurance. This was big, and it happened a lot.
Oh, okay. So they collected insurance money on the horse being killed. It wasn't only
Correct.
just keeping them from having to feed and house it. There was insurance money involved.
This is what it was, is they were killing these horses for insurance money. To make a profit. Basically, so they could get rid of that horse and now have money to buy a new horse.
Right.
Now, Tommy Burns was a freaking doofus. Okay? This guy's so stupid. He comes into play later, so keep his name in mind, but that's basically what he was. He was a hitman for the horses. He was bottom of the barrel.
An equestrian hitman.
Yeah, he's just a bottom of the barrel garbage doofus that people called to do their grunt work, okay? He wanted to be with the high rollers. He was not a high roller. Now, I'm going to introduce a second part. In the early 70s, there was an outfit by the name of the Mafia Horse Gang, or just the Horse Mafia. I'm just going to refer to them as the Mafia because it's easier. Now, their name is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, but the guy who ran it, this guy was no joke. I would not want to meet him in a dark alley, okay? Now, this mafia ran Chicago. They ran they ran Chicago's horse country. And the guy that ran it was named Silas Jane. I'm not going to talk much about him because I am absolutely doing an episode on this guy. I spent like 3 hours just researching him alone. He's super, super interesting. Now, he was a stable owner. He was a horse trainer, but he was someone who was involved heavily in criminal activity. According to a show I watched, City Confidential, it says about the mafia, they bought and sold suspect horses, burned down rivals' barns, and had horses killed. Now, people in horse country absolutely feared them. For a while, people didn't even go to horse shows around Chicago because the mafia would just either pay off the judges or have other people's horses killed, or, I mean, they were horrible. But again, like you said, this was a profit. These mafia people, they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars off this industry. Now, as I mentioned before, Bailey was scammed by a group of people in Chicago. And it was the mafia. They scammed him out of a horse. And basically, Bailey grew to admire them. And this is where he got the idea to start scamming people basically the same way. So he got into bed with them. So that's where they come into play, is that, Bailey learned from them. Bailey, worked with them. He kind of ran with them a little bit, but he helped the mafia, get horses and things like that.
Yeah.
In 1991, Tommy the Sandman Burns is arrested in Florida. He is caught executing a horse for insurance money. This is why Burns is an idiot. So he gets arrested, he goes to jail, and he's like sitting there twiddling his thumbs, whistling, waiting for one of his so-called friends, air quotes everybody, to come and bond him out. These people are smart. I'm not talking to you, bro. I'm not getting anywhere near you. Are you insane? First of all, I'm a millionaire and you're a hitman for animals. Why would I come and bond you out?
Right, I can get another one.
Absolutely. Well, we're not friends. We'll conduct some business together, possibly. Sandman is blown away. He cannot believe these people are not coming and bonding him out. Right? He feels like, now mind you, he will tell you he's no rat, right? But homeboy sings like a canary, okay?
Oh, yeah.
The feds go down there and talk to him because now mind you, again, Steve Miller is trying to bring charges against Bailey. Now, this is info, right? So he goes down there and he says, hey, you were running the same crew, same area as Bailey. What kind of information do you have? And Sandman's like, how much time you got? Okay? So, he gives the feds enough information to help indict some of the most predominant equestrians in Chicago's horse country. I'm talking millionaires. Now, I'm not talking bottom of the barrel feeders. Millionaires. One story that I had just told you a little bit about, one story is about a son of one of the wealthiest men in America. This guy got indicted. Oh, spoiler alert. Miller hoped that he was doing a ladder. He gets to Sandman. Sandman's going to talk about this person. Miller's going to go talk, you know what I mean? And just move up the ranks and find out what he can find out from these people. Because again, Miller's trying to put his name on the map, okay? And solving the Brach case, which is still to this day, one of the most known popular unsolved cases in Chicago, he wanted to basically be on the map to find out who killed or what happened to Helen Brach. So he's questioning these people, trying to get information. One person he comes across is Joe Plemons. He was arrested for the horse scheming, selling, switching bait, whatever the heck he was doing. He wanted to cut a deal, so he told the police he knew why Brach was murdered and who did it. Plemons tells police about Helen finding out about Bailey's scamming and planned to go to the police, which that is true. But Plemons is a con man. He's no better than Bailey. He was doing the same thing Bailey basically was doing.
Con men, you can almost guarantee a con man will get rid of his competition.
Well, correct, but that's the problem, is that they were worried that he was telling these lies so that they would basically just cut him a deal and then he could run away. Correct.
Yeah.
So that part was true. So he had to find that out from somewhere. Now, Plemons said that Bailey offered him $5,000 to kill Helen Brach to keep her quiet. I don't know if there's necessarily that much proof, but he said that that's what happened. On July 27th, 1994, 17 years after her disappearance and 5 years after they began trying to get RICO charges on Bailey, a grand jury indicts Bailey on 29 charges, including conspiracy to commit murder. In the end, after all this is said and done, 21 to 36 people in 10 different states were indicted on various charges from racketeering, animal cruelty, extortion, and different types of frauds. They arrested horse trainers, owners, competitors, doctors. There was this one interview, this guy was a vet. He was their vet and he was in on it, like veterinarian. The whole equestrian side of it's super cool. I wish I would have dug a little deeper into it, but it didn't have too much to do with Helen Brach, but it is a fascinating case. Mm-hmm. Now, Bailey pulls a power move. Power play. He pleads guilty for the defrauding charges. Okay, so again, to digress a bit, just to explain where we are, because again, I understand there's a lot of components. Bailey's entire life, he swindled women over, and I'm talking dozens and dozens of women. Over the years, they filed lawsuits against him. And Miller, the U.S. attorney, found out about these lawsuits. So he's tying, this is what he's getting for the RICO case is on these lawsuits, okay? And on these fraud charges. Now, if he can prove that all of these fraud charges and throw in Helen's fraud charge, he can get a conspiracy to commit murder. And that's where they got the indictment from. He has 29 charges. And I forgot, I think like 26 or 16 of them were basically the women that were able to come forward. He pleads guilty to every fraud charge except for anything that had to do with Helen Brach. Okay? And I'll explain why. If he took the 29 charges and put it in front of a jury, you're now having like women come in and testify. Juries are more emotional. You can either go in front of, I don't know if you know this, but when you go, you don't have to have a jury trial. If you plead not guilty to something, you can go in front of a judge and have a judge sentence you. Okay? Not just a jury, but you can have a trial and go in front of a judge. So he didn't want to take the 29 charges and just go and have a straight, like a normal trial like you and I would know, because there could be women on there, widows. He was too scared.
Tug at the heartstrings.
Correct, that they were going to be too emotional. So he pleads guilty to some of the charges, goes in front of a judge on the sentencing for those, and I guess basically went in front of the judge on the ones he pled not guilty for Helen Brach. He hears, I'm going to be super quick about this because it just wasn't super interesting, but he basically goes in front of the judge. The judge looks at all the evidence. He testifies. So he testifies in his own trial, which he should not have. He's so used to swindling people. You're not going to swindle a state's attorney. You're not going to swindle a judge. You know what I mean? These people know what they're doing. And he went there. He made a fool of himself. There was enough evidence to convict him of conspiracy or solicitation to commit murder in the Helen Brach case. So, Judge Milton Sayer found 65-year-old Bailey guilty of conspiracy or solicitation to murder Helen Brach. He got 30 years in federal prison because, again, it's RICO. 10 years for the racketeering and the RICO charges, and 20 years for the solicitation and conspiracy, and they ran it concurrent and not... they ran it consecutive, which means it's on top of each other. Concurrent would be if he did 10 years, and while he's doing the 10 years, he does the 20 years. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Consecutive is 10 years, then you do your next sentence. So it's consecutive. He did get released in 2019 after serving 24 years in prison. Till this day, nobody has been convicted of her murder. No one's been tried. I mean, not even tried. No one has been arrested for her murder. Now, the reason why I did bring up the mafia is because there are rumors that the mafia actually had her killed. The horse gang mafia. It is said that they had her killed because she said she was going to go. And again, this was a massive industry with millions of dollars and people that, you know, had a lot of money. They were worried that she was going to go and snitch and they were all going to go to prison.
Well, I mean, how do we even know she was murdered?
We don't.
A body wasn't even
We know
found.
nothing. That is literally the entire case of Helen Brach. There's definitely a lot of components to it. And just the fact that nothing ever came. I mean, Richard Bailey, I'm very mixed about. I have very mixed emotions about Richard Bailey. Because to me, there was no direct evidence that he was involved in killing her. Besides the word of a con man. Honestly, don't think, from the evidence that I saw, the judge could have seen more. I don't think I would have convicted Richard Bailey. But Matlick? No, I think I would have convicted him.
I'm telling you, that sounds like it was kind of a... Bailey came to Matlick because Matlick's the inside guy. He's the one who's in the house.
I apologize. I forgot to mention that. There was rumors that said that Matlick found out what Bailey was doing and he was going to turn Bailey in, but then Bailey got to him first and was like, hey, listen, let's get a cut of the money together.
Yeah, bring you in.
There's so many rumors. I didn't want to touch on all of them because, again, we're probably an hour in already.
But that's the 70s thing, though. Mafia had their hand in every little thing. I mean, banks, horse, racing. I mean, alcohol and drugs, and I mean they were involved in anything that they saw made any kind of money.
Silas Jane, I cannot wait to cover him. A little spoiler, he had his brother murdered. He murdered his brother for profit. I mean, this guy was a horrific human being. But like I said, the Helen Brach case, it's a little sporadic. It was a little everywhere. But this case, that's just how it is. There were so many components. Because the problem is, the reason why this case is so sporadic is because we have no idea what happened to this woman. She could have honestly walked out, got hit by a car, died, someone put her in the trunk, moved on, and for some reason, Matlick lied. I mean, you just literally have no idea. We have no idea what happened to her. I think what we do know is she did not disappear on her own. She did not want to go missing. She had no reason to go missing. And I'm going to assume she's passed away, even if it is of natural causes. I mean, she was born in 1911. So
yeah.
That is it for tonight's case. That was the Helen Brach case. Let us know what you think about the case, you guys. We appreciate you. Thank you so much for dealing with my crazy, sporadic case tonight.
It was interesting, but
I just hope it made sense. That's my biggest worry.
You definitely follow. It was easy to follow the names and everything like that, but it was definitely interesting. But it just sounds like, it sounds like a mafia thing. She had money. She found out, and she was gonna shed light on the whole operation, and they had to stop her.